So, welcome to the very first of our post-launch events, a question and answer with Rhianna, who was the lead researcher on this project for the Lines Between. I'll let Rhianna introduce herself, but just to give you an update of how this is going to work, this is a Zoom webinar system, and so you can only see Rhianna and myself at the moment. There are 3 different functions that we have that you can kind of ask questions and get in touch with us. So there's the chat function, the Q&A function, and the raise hand function. So if you raise your hand, we could, if you would like, we can actually bring you up onto the screen with us to ask you a question, or alternatively, you can ask your question in either the chat box or the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. So yeah, please just, we've got a kind of a set time for questions at the end. And I'm literally going to ask Rhianna 3 very basic leading questions, so there should be lots of opportunity for you to get involved. So, without further ado, Rhianna, if you would like to introduce yourself, what your role is, and what your kind of history with us has been.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm Rhianna, obviously. I was the researcher on the Status of Young Women in Scotland report this year. I keep saying this year, but it was actually last year. We finished writing it this year, but the research took place in 2019. So it was sort of my first big project that I led in my job as a researcher, which is amazing because it really aligns with a lot of my values as a person and as a woman. And yeah, I have been involved with the Young Women's Movement for quite a few years actually, through various different means. I first came across you guys in 2016, I think, for the second Status of Young Women in Scotland report, and I came on board as a volunteer researcher at that point. I was still at uni, and knew that I wanted to work in social research, and then saw this opportunity for volunteer researchers to take part in the report. So I got involved and met, at the time it was Cara, who was the director of the Young Women's Movement, and Lorraine, who is now my boss, and she is the director of the Lines Between. And yeah, I got involved that way, and then weirdly kept in touch with Lorraine, who was the director of the Lines Between at that point, and she gave me a job about a year later. So yeah, this report and the Young Women's Movement and the Lines Between have actually been very, very important in my life in a lot of ways. So to be able to kind of lead on the research this year was very cool and quite serendipitous because of that, yeah, journey basically. So yeah, that was my role. I helped co-design the research with you guys. Had a lot of your input at the beginning to kind of design the questions and stuff, and we can talk about the approach in a minute. Yeah, and then did all the interviews, focus groups, the data analysis for the survey, and then wrote it with help from some amazing volunteers, which we're also, I'm sure, going to talk about in a minute as well. So yeah, that was my role.
Great. So just a small role.
Just a little one.
in it. So next thing I guess I was going to ask, which I'm sure people are interested in, is like a basic rundown of like, how did you do the research? How did you come up with the questions? You know, were there different avenues that you explored this year that perhaps you hadn't done before, or kind of tried and tested methods from previous status researchers?
Yeah, a mix of all of that stuff. So the first step was thinking about the topic. So we had a meeting with Patricia, who is the director of the Young Women's Movement. I think it was July last year, actually, where we had the funding. You guys had the funding to commission the research, and we were going to be your partners to do the research again. So that was the first step, was kind of meet up and talk about what we wanted to actually look into, because every year, obviously, the research has been on a different theme. Mm-hmm. So last year we looked at political participation, and this year is body image. So the Young Women's Movement has done a number of sort of bits of work that have skirted around body image, but nothing that was specifically focused. So the Young Women Lead report last year was about sports and participation for girls in high schools in sports. And one of the main things that came out of that was the fact that body image played a huge role in why young girls weren't feeling confident in doing sports. And so that was something that you guys were really interested in. And then once we'd had that meeting, there was loads that kind of popped up while we were having that conversation of like avenues to explore. So we really wanted to look into social media and the impact of that on body image. So yeah, that was the first stage. So we had the topic, and then we kind of needed to just like think about who we wanted to speak to, how we were going to do it. Just a few things.
Just the small things.
The small things. And the questions that we wanted to ask. So that whole process was pretty collaborative as well with you. We sort of handed over the reins of organising the fieldwork to you guys, as in sort of, I think people kind of underestimate the huge amount of work it is to actually set up focus groups and interviews. That's a really sort of, it's a big task, because you're kind of asking people to give up their time for free, really. And a lot of people are really interested in talking about these issues, but a lot of people feel like it's actually not that important, or it maybe hasn't occurred to them that they might want to share stuff in that setting. So yeah, we kind of gave that to you guys. So you guys organised who I was going to speak to, and then I organised when. So that was good, because it meant that I had more time to kind of think about what we were actually going to be talking about. So we knew we wanted to do a survey. Last year was the first time we'd done a survey, and that was hugely important for the research, because we had stats and we had percentages and we had lots of really amazing bits of data to sort of work around, and that was really important. The initial survey results started coming in, I think, a week or two before I started doing the focus groups. So it meant I had a really sort of initial understanding of like, oh, this is the things that I can sort of probe on and ask about in the groups. So we came up with the survey questions, and luckily at the Lines Between we have a quantitative whiz. His name is Alistair, and he has worked on huge longitudinal surveys in his career. So he was really helpful for me to think of some questions that I probably wouldn't have, or think of different ways to ask questions. So we used a lot of rating scales, which I thought was a really good way of asking, because it can be quite difficult to ask somebody, what do you think, and like give them an open sort of dialogue there. So we had the first question, I think, was how do you feel about your body, and it gave them 6 options. So it was like, I look from I hate my body to I don't like my body sometimes, I like my body sometimes, I like my body, I love my body. So there was that scale, which was really, really useful, and it was really good to have his input on that. So we had the survey, which was great, and you guys disseminated it on Twitter, and it got loads of really good responses, huge response rate that I didn't expect either. I think we had 400 responses by the end, which is pretty big, so that's cool. So once we had that, I started coming up with the questions for the focus group. So we kind of used the questions from the survey as a model to move from, but I quickly kind of found out as I started doing the focus groups that each group I did was so different from the one before, that I really just used the questions as a guide, and I kind of just had them there in case people needed a bit of prompting or probing. But it was very much just I'm going to speak to you about body image, tell me what you think, and the conversations would just go from there, and weirdly kind of would touch on a lot of the things I'd wanted to ask about without me having to actually bring those things up. I was more just there as a bit of a moderator to kind of guide the conversation rather than probe people. So where am I in the process?
Focus groups.
Focus groups. So yeah, we started doing focus groups. So we went across all different parts of Scotland. We went to where did we go this year? Glasgow, Clydebank. I think the furthest north I went was Alness, which is north of Inverness. So that was pretty far away. That was in December as well. I remember that train being freezing, and then there nobody being on it. And yeah, we did groups of different sizes. I think the biggest one I did was with 12 girls in high school, which I definitely want to talk about a bit more in a bit, because that was a really pivotal point, I think, in the research. And then the smallest one, I think I had two young women come to the Lines Between office, and we just kind of had a cup of tea and a chat. So yeah, they were really varied, and they were all really different from each other as well. So the research ended in December. So kind of I think I had my last focus group in like the middle of December. And the survey closed, I think, at the beginning of December. So that's when we had all of our data. And then it was kind of over to the lovely volunteers to transcribe for us.
Some of whom are on this call.
Hello, thank you so much. So yeah, they were hugely important because I actually had a lot of our work as a research company. We transcribe all of our interviews and focus groups, and I think it's really important to do that because you get literally the verbatim word for word transcripts of what people have said, and I think that the quotes in the report add so much to it. You know, I almost feel like sometimes when I was writing it, I was just writing around the quotes. Really, they told the story. So yeah, the transcribers transcribed, the volunteers transcribed those, and then that meant after Christmas time I could come back and I had all the transcripts, I had all the data from the survey, and I could kind of sit and look at it and be like, right, what's coming out of this? What are the important things we need to think about? And it quickly occurred to me that we had about, I think, 4 open and ended questions in the survey. So that was questions where people could leave comments. Like, I think one of them was describe a time that your body image stopped you from doing something. And usually, historically in surveys, people don't really use those. People kind of flick through surveys quite quickly and don't take the time to sort of fill those parts in. But we had like 300 comments for each of them. So I kind of looked at this at the end in January and was like, oh my God, it's going to take me so long to kind of go through all these because they were all so juicy and so interesting. And I thought it would be, it was really important that we captured all of it. So it wasn't intended that the volunteers would help again with analysis, but it was really important that they did because I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own. So the volunteers each got a question to analyse themselves, so a comment box to kind of analyse themselves. And I kind of talked them through how we might do that and gave them tips, and I was always there to kind of help them. But that was basically to just kind of like, right, look at all these comments and what are the things that are coming out for you guys? What's important here? Quotes and things like that as well. So it was analysis. That was the point. That was in January, and that was maybe like the hardest part because I had to pick the things that we were going to focus on in the report, and there was so much that I just wanted to write the whole thing up, but include every point. But we had to keep it accessible and small to an extent. So yeah. It was great, and it was really hard because a lot of the stuff that had come out was pretty tragic and sad and difficult, but there was a lot in it as well that was really positive and just opened my eyes hugely to what was going on for young women. So analysis and writing, and I wrote it I think in a week at the end of February, and then, that was it. I've handed it over to you guys. And then you and Pilar made it one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The illustrations.
Yeah, thanks. I think that leads on kind of really nicely to the last question that I have for you. So obviously, like, you yourself are someone that the Tavern probably did fill out the report, but your relationship with the report was obviously quite different because it wasn't just your experiences, there were so many other experiences. And I know that when we were kind of reading the report, we identified so strongly as like a team of young women ourselves, half of us, that we felt what was being said, we recognised those experiences. So I know you mentioned it earlier and you said you were going to come back to it. What stood out the most to you kind of about this report? What was not necessarily the most shocking statistic, but just something that really kind of, is the thing that you're going to take kind of from this process?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was a statistic that stood out for me the most, but the thing that I haven't really been able to kind of shift was the constant of body image. I think last year anyway, the political participation, I felt like I had a lot of opinions about that because I feel like I'm quite a political person, and I definitely had an idea of what was going to come out of that research before I took part in it and before I did it. This year I was completely blown away and like had no idea of really about the impacts that poor body image has on young women. So for me, I think I now realise that I'm really lucky in that I feel like I actually probably have quite a healthy relationship with my body, and I maybe didn't realise that before this, and hearing from so many young women who don't and who really struggle with their body images. And so as I said, that the first group we did was with a group of 12 teenage girls who were still in high school. So I went to their high school, and that was both, I think it was a huge blessing that I did that group first, because it was definitely the one that I've never stopped thinking about. I think I'll remember it forever. They were so open and so eager to talk about this, and it came at the end, once we'd finished our conversation, that they had realised they hadn't had this kind of conversation before. They hadn't ever sat down with their pals, because the other thing that came out as well is that there's 12 of them, and they were all kind of friends because they were all in the same year in high school. But as a group, they'd never had a conversation about like what body image does to them and what their body image does to them. But it came out throughout that conversation that they literally think about the way they look all the time, from the minute they wake up until they go to bed. It is literally on their head, in their brains all the time. And that's what's been really sort of big for me, and just realizing how crippling it can be for so many women and young women. And then an example of that is that I can't remember whether this quote is in the report, but one of them said that they would wake up in the morning and on a school day and text round two of their pals and see if they were wearing makeup that day, because they felt like they wouldn't go into school without makeup unless their friends were also not wearing makeup. So that was like, I couldn't quite get my head around that. But then it also reminded me of being in high school a little bit, because of that whole thing of, feeling like you need to be the same as everyone else, or feeling like you need to fit in. So I think that a lot of the stuff that I felt in high school is probably still the same, but just exacerbated because of social media. And then most of our conversation from then went on to Instagram, and we talked about Instagram for primarily that whole hour, and the behaviors around it and the things that they struggled with Instagram. So I can talk about that, but then I'm also aware you might want to jump in and ask some questions. Or
yeah, we do. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, both anonymous. So actually there are two very different questions. So just because you just brought up something that's relevant to this one. So the first one is, you said that there were some things you had to leave out of the report for the sake of length. Any topics or quotes in particular spring to mind?
Yeah, so there's actually, I don't know if people have had a chance to go through the whole report yet, but there's a bit at the end with additional quotes because I literally felt like I couldn't leave them out. They were, I thought, really relevant to the research, but we did have to keep it quite short. There was two bits that I struggled with and talk to you guys about keeping in, because we didn't want to glamorize an issue any more than it needed to be, and one of them was around fatphobia. So I had a group with a group of young women who identified themselves as plus size. That's how they kind of described themselves, and that was so enlightening for me and really sad and infuriating in a lot of ways. They told a lot of different stories about experiences of fatphobia that they'd had, and we didn't include all of those in the report because they were really, really sad. And we also just felt like we didn't want to add, we didn't want to do a sort of shock factor thing of like, here's a really horrible story that a young woman's told and something that she's been through that is obviously hugely impactful for her. We didn't want to feel like that added to the research, but it was really profound for sort of thinking about, I don't know, sometimes you can just think about Scotland and you think about Scottish people and you think about how friendly and kind we are. And it was just shocking to hear about some of the things that they go through on a daily basis. I think one thing we did include was that there was one young woman who said that she timed her walks throughout the day. Like, so if she was working from home or at home throughout the day, she would avoid going outside at lunchtime because she lived near a high school, and she would walk past the high school and get screamed and shouted at from the high school. I was just like, God, I couldn't imagine that. So yeah, that was we had to be careful about the stories, because that was the other thing, that when you talk about body image, it's so linked to like personal experience and personal trauma in a lot of cases. So we had to just be quite careful about the stories that we were including, and being sensitive about that, I guess.
Thanks for that. We've got another question by an anonymous person here. So this is actually interesting, because we ended up doing kind of a piece of research with a younger focus group. So the question is, were there any differences between the opinions or feelings of younger and older women that stood out? So that's definitely something I know you've got stuff to say on.
Yeah, there was just a few. So initially we noticed with the survey that the younger women, the participants who responded to the survey who said they didn't like their bodies or hated their bodies, were primarily 16 to 18 years old. So that was something that was quite striking quite quickly. It was like, oh wow, okay, so there is a difference then in the way young women feel about their bodies depending on age. So we thought it was really important to kind of pursue that a bit further. So we actually ended up organising initially, I should say that status of young women in Scotland is usually 16 to 30 is the age range that we speak to and that can participate in the research. But we actually opened it out to younger ages this year after these initial findings, because one of the questions in the report was, in the survey was, when did you first become aware of your body image? And all of those responses were sort of really young, was like 8, 7, 9, 10, that kind of age was the age that young women first started becoming aware that they had an appearance. Because I guess that's quite an abstract thing to think about. It's like, actually, when did you realize that other people had an opinion on your body? And it was really young. So like people sort of mums having comments about like, oh, you're chubby, or overhearing. I think one of the young women talked about overhearing their parents talking about them and saying that they were chubby. Another talked about like realizing that their packed lunch was becoming like, instead of like a normal packed lunch with like crisps and a sandwich, was like just vegetables, and their mum was putting them on a diet without them kind of realizing it. So like body image realization was happening really quickly and really young. So anyway, yes, we explored with younger groups about how they felt about their bodies, and there was huge differences in age range. So the 16 to 18 sort of category, there was definitely a lot of negativity and a lot of feelings of like just a lot of self-consciousness. It was really negative for them. And then for the younger age group that we spoke to, I can only say that this is representative of the group that I spoke to as well. They were a group of, I think the youngest was 11 and the oldest was like 14. And I think it was also quite specific to their situation, but they had really positive body images. Like they felt really good and they felt really confident. And they were specifically from a sports group, like a gymnastics group. And they'd all been going to the same gymnastics group since they were like 6 or 7, and had grown up together and had grown up with these like coaches who acted as mentor figures, and they had quite open conversations with these mentors about like periods and about puberty and about like just normalizing those kind of conversations. And then they also had talked about having much more of a focus on like the way their body felt, and like in terms of strength and flexibility, like that was much more what they were focused on rather than how they looked. Because I was going into it thinking, right, these they're like 12, are in leotards, they must after everything that I've, done, they must not like their bodies because everyone else has said that this is how they feel. But actually they were totally fine. They were like, nah, like I love being in a leotard. I feel great in a leotard. Like I like, yeah. And like, that was lovely. And that was the last one we did actually. So it was really nice to end on that. Anyway, I feel like I'm going around in a big circle, but the older young women that I spoke to, so like age sort of mid-20s to 30, were really much more able to reflect on how their younger selves had played a part in how they feel now. So they were able to reflect on like, actually high school was super traumatic and terrible for my self-esteem, but are able to now reflect on that. So like feeling better now, but knowing that they didn't feel good at the time. So I think that that's quite positive in that it says that the younger women that we spoke to, who are like 16 to 18, there's hope, there's hope that by the time they get to their mid-20s, they actually will feel much better. But yeah, there was also huge differences in the way that they use social media as well. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Leads very nicely on to this question. We've got 3 questions in, but just because you just mentioned that, we've got a message here from Sorsha, who was one of our volunteers, who's asked, from the conversations that you had, do you think that social media is what has the biggest impact on young girls' body image?
Yeah. Yes. Instagram was the number one thing in the report that was the biggest influence. We asked, I think it was out of all the social medias, I think we put like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram was the top. And then when we asked in comparison to like your friends and family and your partner and we asked it in comparison to other things too, and Instagram came out on top again. So yeah, 100%. And from the group, again, the same group of high school girls that I mentioned, our whole conversation was about Instagram. They introduced me to a lot of new concepts. I hadn't heard of Finstas. That was a thing I learned about. So that is, for anyone else who does not know what a Finsta is, it's your fake Instagram. And that's your Instagram where you put your kind of like private like photos that you just want your friends to see. So like pictures of you eating your dinner and like funny memes and stuff. Whereas your other Instagram is where you have your public profile. And that would be all the pictures that you edit and that you want, that's what your public persona is. It's kind of how I identified with it anyway. And yeah, it basically is like a completely consuming thing. All of them had talked about having Instagrams from the age of P6. So they would have been 16 when I spoke to them. I think a few of them were 17. And the timeline adds up, isn't it? Really, so because Instagram would have come out 6 or 7 years ago, so they'd had Instagram since they were 10.
I think just to jump in there, it's probably worth saying that actually the legal age for Instagram is 13.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So they'd all had Instagram since before they were allowed to, and it was just so embedded in their like personas. It was so much part of how they got their self-worth and their validation, because I completely identify with that. Sometimes I'll put a picture up and like feel great when I get likes on it. Like that's quite a normal thing. That's why we do social media a lot of the time. But for them it was like integral to the way that they felt about themselves. A lot of them talked about like if they put a picture up and it didn't get 200 likes, they'd delete it. They talked about, there's a section in the report about Instagram behaviors, because I just thought it was so fascinating, like the way that they interacted with it, that they would like time posting it so that they would, if they knew that their friend was going to be posting a picture in like 20 minutes, they'd wait another hour so that they weren't posting at the same time as a friend or someone else in their like peer group. Or if they did do that by accident, they would delete their post and then put it up again later. So like the way that they interacted with it themselves was really obviously hugely consuming, but then also the way that they are influenced by Instagram, like the people they follow, came up a lot. And yeah, I think we have to talk about the Kardashians. But yeah, huge thing. And kind of just they talked about like that's where their ideals come from. That's where the sort of beauty standards are created. It's not really magazines anymore or, you know, movies. It's Instagram. That's where young women are getting all of their validation, all of their influence. That's where everything is kind of happening for them. And then for it to be that, and then for them to also offer them a chance to like put themselves out there, it's pretty scary actually how not regulated it is, considering how much of an impact it has.
We've got 2 questions related to social media, and then I think we'll wrap up and move on to where there's another 2, which is actually on the more like positive, like how can we get out of this. So I'll ask the ones about social media, and then we'll go on to like the light at the end of the the sad tunnel. And so Nick has asked that other than social media, were there any other standout contributors to negative body image? And then there's an anonymous question asking, why do you think the Finsta is viewed as fake, considering then
it's real,
the public one?
So negatives were mums, which made me really sad. Mums were a big one that I didn't expect, because again, feel very lucky that I have my mum never kind of put any pressure on me to look a certain way, and she was never like a serial dieter or anything, so I never had that influence from a young age. But yeah, whenever I probed about family in the focus groups, it was always mums that kind of came up as negative influences. So maybe mums had never sort of outrightly said like, you need to think about your body this way, or you need to go on a diet. You know, they might not have done that, but just the way that mums viewed their own bodies played a huge part in how they grew up feeling about their bodies. So like if their mum was on a diet, from, you know, one participant talked about their mum had always been a size 6 and had always been on diets, like serial dieting throughout their childhood. So like she would cook herself a separate dinner to what the kids were having. She would like always have scales in the house in every room. She went in Weight Watchers and all those kind of things. So if you're growing up around that, then obviously you kind of take on some of those habits and behaviors. And yeah, I just hadn't maybe thought about the extent to which that impacts you, really. And then there were some other pretty tough things that people said their mums had said to them about the way they dressed and how they looked in clothes and how they should look. There was a lot of stuff about, a lot of bad stuff about mums. I think there was one person I spoke to again that had a good thing to say about their mum. But again, this is just representative of who I spoke to, but yeah, it's not great from the mums. We need to do better with mums.
And then, so I've also heard that Finsta can mean friends Insta.
Oh.
Rather than fake Insta. I've heard both.
Okay.
So I think that's interesting. That, yeah, I'm not sure if there's been a kind of overall decision on which one it is. But I've certainly heard it referred to as a friend Insta as well as a fake Insta.
That probably makes more sense, because I literally have got this definition from the young woman that said it. I asked her, I was like, what does a Finsta mean? And she was like, a fake Insta. And I was like, cool, that's what it means. Never did any more thinking. So that makes sense.
So we've got 2 questions here about kind of like next steps, but also about yourself. So the first one is an anonymous question which says that it's really interesting that young women in high school feel pressure to wear or not wear makeup. It made me think of my high school experience where I felt pressured to wear makeup to fit in, but often I would get told off as makeup wasn't allowed. But even as a young woman, I thought that if there was more education on positive body image, then young women might not feel pressure to wear makeup and wouldn't break the rules. Do you think schools will do more to promote body positivity, and how can we encourage schools to do this? And this is obviously a really good question, and also one that should definitely be asked to our body positive activist panel at 6 p.m. Little plug there for that. I wonder, Rhianna, if you have any thoughts on that.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, again, talking about the group of high school girls I talked to, for them to say at the end of that conversation that that was the first time they'd ever had an open, no judgment, sort of safe space to have that conversation was pretty scary. And then when I remember back to high school, yeah, we never ever had any conversations about body image, and especially now that social media and Instagram is so huge, like they have their phones at school, it's literally everywhere and yeah, happening all the time. So 100% I think it should be included in like social studies, PSE, like all of that stuff. And I think it's about exposure and making teachers and the educational system understand how much impact this is having. And I think that this research is actually really important, because another part of the research was kind of seeing what else was out there that was like what we were doing, and there was nothing. There was like one Scottish Government report that looked at the impact of social media on mental health for young people in Scotland, but there was nothing specifically linked to body image. So if we don't have that evidence base there, how do we make people understand that it's a big deal? Because young women aren't going to go to their teachers and say, this is something I'm really struggling with, actually, it'd be good if we could have some classes about this. I think it's about this, it's about doing research, it's about evidence, it's about lobbying, it's about like pushing for it to be included in a curriculum, pushing for it to be taken seriously. And I think that it could feed into a wider kind of conversation about social media and mental health. But body image definitely needs to be a big part of that. Yeah.
Cool, and there's one last question here, which is a nice way to end, I think, if no one else has any other questions, because it's kind of a reflective question about you and your kind of journey doing this research. So it's an honest question, and it's you said doing this research made you realise that you have a positive body image. Do you have any tips on how to improve one's body confidence? For example, any good resources or things that you practice?
Oh, that is nice. Yeah, it was really weird for me to realise like how lucky I am to feel this way, and I don't really know where it came from, apart from the fact that I think there wasn't a huge focus on weight, especially in my house when I was growing up. And again, I think that I feel like I haven't talked about this really, but when we were asking young women like when we say body image, what's the first thought that comes to your head, it was so linked to weight, it was so linked to body size, that yeah, I feel very lucky that I just never had a huge focus on that, and I would identify as like a curvy gal. I do not fit the what used to be the body ideal of like size 6 to 8, you know, really skinny kind of. Yeah, I've never been that. So I think I've always been, there's a hilarious picture of me when I was, and I kind of wish I had it handy that I could show you, but it's like me when I think I must have been 7, and I've got these amazing like bright pink cycle shorts on and like crop top, and I'm covered in mud, and I'm just standing there like growling at the camera, and I have the biggest thighs and like the biggest ass for a 7-year-old. Like I have always been chunky and always been like curvy. So it was, I think seeing that picture as a teenager, I think was always just, it was like validating for me as well, because I was like, I've always been this size, I always look like this, like this is just who I am and it's just me. So I think acceptance is such a huge part of it, like accepting the way that you look and being comfortable with that, and knowing that actually that's all that matters. Really doesn't matter what other people think. If you are happy and confident, then you will be. I know it's easier said than done, and again, I've been so shocked and surprised by this research, and yeah, I think it's just literally about acceptance, and hopefully, and I'm sure we will go into it quite a lot tonight in the panel, but social media can actually be a really positive space. I've been introduced to so many amazing podcasts and like people who share stories on Instagram who are from the body positivity movement that have opened my eyes hugely to feeling validated in my happiness, I guess, because I think that's the other part of it that came out hugely in the research, was that there's this like feeling of not being able to say that you're happy and confident, because actually you're looked down on then, like, oh, who does she think she is? She's happy, she's confident, like, why is she better than me? So I think that has really given me the language, I guess, to be able to talk about it in a way that doesn't feel like I'm putting anyone else down, or whatever that kind of weird thing is that people feel. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
I think that's a really nice way to end it, actually, to end on a wee positive note, and a wonderful way to lead in to our body positivity panel session at 6 p.m. So thank you so much, Rhianna, for joining me for this little lunchtime session. You can, I'm sure Rhianna will be on Twitter today. You can check out the Lines Between, who are just at the Lines Between, which is the best Twitter handle. If you have any further questions, and of course we're there as well, just at Young Women Scott. And I hope that a lot of you will be able to join us this evening at our body positivity panel session. And if you have any further questions, yeah, just get in touch either over email or social media. And thank you so much for all joining us this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful bank holiday weekend.
Can I say something quickly?
Oh,
sorry, no, I was just going to say, I really want people to tell me what their favourite part of the report is, or what would surprise them. So if you wanted to tweet, the Lines Between, like direct message or whatever, or if you have me on Instagram, I think quite a lot of my friends around here, send me a little message to tell me what your favourite part of this was and what was interesting for you, because I'd be good to hear that.
Great. Thanks so much again, everyone, and speak to you soon.